If I do not have love, I am nothing. There's a famous saying of St. John of the Cross that says, in the end of our lives, we will be judged by our love. At the end of our lives, we will be judged by our love. In other words, in the end, our love, or ultimately our lack of love, will forever define us. It will forever define us. It will be eternalized, however we lived that call of love in our life. And every one of us is called to the two greatest loves, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So the second reading, St. Paul's famous letter about the love that is patient and love that is kind, he basically highlights, in the end, this will remain the theological virtues. Then in the end of the day and in the end of time, there is faith, hope, and and the greatest of these is love. Literally, love is the mark of a saint. If you want to see if someone's growing closer to God, or you want to see if you want to take the temperature, am I growing closer to God or closer? Am I growing in my faith? It's the idea of like, how are we doing with loving? How are we doing with selfless and sacrificial love for others? Because someone who follows Jesus Christ will ultimately more and more imitate him. Probably over the past 2 months or 10 weeks, I've got to know more about who I would propose is a future saint, Jerome Lejeune. There was a talk on Thursday about his life. He died in the early 1990s. He was a doctor, a geneticist, a husband, and a father. And he worked and studied, he worked in areas, especially with Down syndrome children and ultimately their parents. And for those who have ever had that experience of parents with those with autism or special needs in any way or physical challenges, that there are a lot of love and sacrifices that ultimately go into that. And so here was Jerome's calling was to serve those who are serving the least. His whole life was dedicated. Yes, it was research, and yes, and he was the one that discovered the origin of Down syndrome. You can imagine the pain of parents at the time because it was out in the air there, right? If you have Down syndrome, it might be contagious. Keep your children away from the Down syndrome children. That was a very common superstition. Others, there was another common superstition of, well, parents probably did something to deserve it. This must be God's punishment. That was all out there. And yet Jerome Lejeune, again, studying this issue, and he's like, I think that it could be a genetic defect, and that's what he studied and dedicated his life, and he found out that it was a chromosomal anomaly, trisomy 21. And it wasn't contagious, and it wasn't a punishment from God. It was a genetic defect. And so he lived this life of love, serving the parents that were going through difficulties. Obviously, sometimes there's physical issues, and obviously in the case of some intellectual disability, and he's like, I'm going to support the parents, and I'm going to support the children. Ultimately, he was a great witness of love, a life of love, dedicated to serving others. There was a beautiful story of a mother at the time, and here she had a baby with Down syndrome, and she was very distraught at it. And when she walked in, he said, would you be so gracious as to entrust your child to me? And he takes the child, and he just looked at her. She said, he looked at this child with so much love. She's like, instantly, she was like, I'm not just a mother of a disabled child. He said, what is his name? Paul. I'm a mother of Paul. And something shifted in her mind that she was like, he taught me to love my child. He taught me to love my child. He treated him like a prince. And that witness of love that Jerome had for all of his little patients was so beautiful. His love, his patience, you see. Love is patient, love is kind. Love is patient, love is kind. Jerome's faith overflowed in his presence to others. That's also another sign of faithfulness and holiness. Just a sense of being able to be present to another person. That's a gift of love, to be present to another person. They described Jerome. They were like, when you were in the room with Jerome, it's like as if you were the only person there. You had his full attention and full presence, and that is a form of loving. It's easy to be distracted. It's easy to think of the next thing. It's easy to kind of be over there. But that sense of not just listen, but attention and presence is a form of love. You see, love is not inflated. It does not seek its own interest. His discovery allowed scientists to use his discovery because you could find out if someone had Down syndrome in the womb. And there was a trend at the time towards eugenics, right? The sense of if those who had illness or need, that our recommend ultimately would be to not continue the life of the child in the womb. And that was in the air in the early 70s, not just in France, but really all around. And he won the highest award for all geneticists, the Allen West Award, and this was in San Francisco. And he gave this very talk, and the speaker said, "Hey, don't talk about that issue. It probably won't go over well." And he's like, "Thank you for your advice. I'll do what I need to do." And included in this talk, this is what he said very calmly and rationally, as he talked about the dignity of all people. But this is what he talked about medicine. He said, "For millennia, medicine have striven to fight for life and health and against disease and against death. Any reversal of that order would entirely change medicine itself. Our duty is to not inflict a death sentence on those with genetic defects." And at the end of the talk, no one clapped and no one shook his hand. It was an unforgettable silence. And in the early 70s, more and more that was prevalent, and literally he walked out. It affected more and more his speaking engagements. Well, at that time, that silence, he was like, why that silence? And he's kind of catapulted. It becomes this very public pushing for a lot of these issues, for saying that those with genetic defects don't have the same right to life. And so he's on TV interviews, and he's kind of raising up, and he's saying things like, "I will not stand silent against this trend to advocate for the extermination of children with genetic defects." And he was a very gentle soul but he said these very beautiful things. He's like, "I cannot go along with it. It's impossible. No one should go along with this in the name of science. No one should go along with this in the name of science." You see, he was pro-life and pro-love. He continued in talks and other things, a genetic defect should not be a death sentence. Genetic defect should not be a death sentence. More and more, there was unrest, and there was a lot of push for different issues, pushing for these different issues that advocated towards things like the abortion, especially of those who have these defects. And that was in France and really all around the world. And so he would give a talk, and there would be people like shouting things, and they would say things like, "Boo, boo, Lejeune! Boo, boo!" And they were like, "Death to Lejeune and his little monsters." Like, that's the situation he was in. And yet he didn't judge them. He's like, "I don't judge them. Are they wicked? I leave that to God. But I speak against ideas, not against men. I speak against bad ideas." And he continued. He kind of became this rising witness, but less and less he was accepted by the scientific community because he was not in the current fashion and the trends of the day. He says, "These children, Down syndrome children, are extremely lovable. They're real children. The idea that anyone in our country can campaign to kill children because they're disabled is not something I can bear." And he became this really prophetic witness to a world that needed to hear it. And he became ultimately the voice for the voiceless. This sense of a love that does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but love always rejoices in the truth. You see this reality that says, he talked about this, he says, yes, those with Down syndrome have medical complications. It's not going to be easy. And yes, there is an intellectual disability of sorts. But he said those with Down syndrome, he was a great advocate. He says they have an intelligence of the heart. They're pure love. It's pure love. You know, whenever we talk about things like Down syndrome, this is not like from the distant past, this was in the 90s, but this is current day, and this isn't just in France. This is all around the world. All around the world. 8 out of 10, those who find out they are pregnant with Down syndrome are recommended abortion or have abortions. Many are recommended. That's the current state of science and doctors right now. In the sense of the littlest among us, the least among us. I remember there was during the Pro-Life March about 5 years ago or so, they were talking about that, about the dignity of all children, unborn, preborn, especially in that case they have to be highlighting Down syndrome. And there was a young man, he was about 19 years old, and he saw the signs, and he read the sign, and he heard that 8 out of 10, that when they found out the child had Down syndrome had abortions, he looked at the sign and he went to his mom and said, "Mommy, why would they do that? Why would they do that? Why would we do that?" You see, this witness to love and truth always go together. This witness to the dignity of the least among us. Jerome Lejeune said, the quality of civilization is measured by the respect it has for its weakest, for the respect it has for his weakness. Lord, give us the grace to imitate the love, the prophetic witness of love and truth and joy and service and sacrificial service to others. You see, a love that is patient and kind. Love doesn't seek its own interest. Love doesn't rejoice in wrongdoing. It rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. You see, in the end, Jerome Lejeune is a witness for our time, a witness to care for the least among us, to be witnesses of that kind of love. You see, in the end, three things matter to the Lord: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love.